It had not been a great start to the decade for Thomas Holway. In May 1950, he had been re-elected as Premier of Victoria, though his Liberals had lost a few seats. The next month, the Country Party, with Labor support, defeated Holway's government in a vote of no confidence. Their leader, John Macdonald, despite representing a party half the size of Labor or the Liberals, formed the next government of Victoria. Despite this setback, Holway chose to stay on as opposition leader. A veteran of the Legislative Assembly by that point, he knew that political fortunes in Victoria changed with the wind. Just over a year later, in December 1951, a motion was passed which rendered the leadership positions of the Liberal Party vacant. 3 MPs were absent from the meeting that day, as the Sun recorded. Mr Kitson, MLC for Ballarat, who was on his way to Melbourne when his car broke down at Wallan, Mr Macdonald, MLC, who was ill at his Geelong home, and the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, Mr Michaelis, who arrived at the meeting too late to vote. It was said that all 3 would have supported Mr Holway. Holway's opponent, Les Norman, bested him by a margin of 2 votes. Holway's fall set in motion a series of events that would culminate in conspiracy, constitutional crisis, and perhaps most importantly, electoral reform. The history of Victorian politics is one of instability born of malapportionment and disenfranchisement. Premiers changed frequently as coalitions formed and collapsed. A period of relative stability existed in the 1940s when the Country Party formed government with the support of Labor. The idea of a Nationals-led government, let alone one supported by the Labor Party, is unthinkable today. Even back then, it was difficult to conceive how the 2 disparate parties could cooperate. Simply put, Labor and the Liberals both disliked each other's ideology more than that of the Country Party. Historian Bruce Graham illustrates this in The Choice of Voting Methods in Federal Politics 1902 to 1918, using preference flows from the 1919 and 1922 federal elections, where the Country Party was the overwhelming beneficiary of both Labor and Nationalist preferences. The Country Party was helped along in the Legislative Assembly by malapportioned regional electorates. In 1950, the country seat of Benambra saw 12,501 electors vote, while the suburban seat of Dandenong had a turnout of 33,214, yet both seats returned 1 MP. Adding to the complexity, the Victorian Upper House, which at that point elected MPs in single-member constituencies, still had the colonial-era barriers to voting, meaning the franchise was restricted to those who had significant landholdings, were graduates of any university in the British Dominions, or were lawyers, ministers, or military officers. A condition of Labor's support for the Country Party to form government was the abolition of these requirements, and later in 1950 the government made good on their commitment, enfranchising more than 800,000 Victorians and greatly shifting the electoral balance in the historically conservative-dominated chamber. The first test of these reforms came in 1952 with the Legislative Council elections of that year, which were held separately from the lower house until 1961. The election saw Labor take 7 seats off of the Liberals to become the largest party in the Legislative Council. While the changes to the franchise contributed to the result, historian Paul Strangio notes in his book Neither Power Nor Glory that the strong result was not solely due to the reformed electoral system, but also a product of the public's discontent with the economic management of the Menzies government that was fanned by Labor leader John Cain Sr. during the Upper House campaign. A so-called horror budget the previous September to curb severe inflationary pressures had been followed in early 1952 by the imposition of draconian import restrictions to check an alarming deterioration in the country's balance of payments. The first electoral obstacle had been cleared, and Labor's strong showing encouraged them to pursue further reform, including the redistribution of the Legislative Assembly. The country government had been happy to change the rules for voting in the Legislative Council, as it had no effect on their representation. The Liberals were overwhelmingly the victims of that reform, but the government feared that reform to the malapportionment of the Legislative Assembly would put country seats on the chopping block. Thus, in meetings between Labor and the government in July, Macdonald made it clear that his government would not enact reforms to the Legislative Assembly as Labor proposed. Labor's state executive said that the government had repudiated its agreement with the party to implement the redistribution, while The Age reported that the Premier had said that the Country Party would not introduce and had never agreed to introduce a redistribution plan based solely on 4 additional metropolitan seats. It was less than a month after the Legislative Council elections that Labor withdrew support for the country government. As an early election would be inopportune for the Liberals, they reluctantly offered support to the government a few days after Labor's withdrawal. The Liberals' displeasure at this arrangement was plain to see. They were now supporting the party that had seen them thrown out of government just 2 years ago. Liberal leader Les Norman offered his resignation, but retracted it after he was entreated to stay by the party room. As the Liberals negotiated concessions from the government, such as a scaled-back redistribution plan and requiring a referendum to abolish the Legislative Council, plotters gathered strength in the darkness. Thomas Tuke Holway had taken what was a standard path to Liberal politics. He was dux at the Church of England Grammar School in Ballarat, studied law at Melbourne, and worked as a solicitor before becoming the state MP for Ballarat in 1932, aged 25. He rapidly climbed the ranks, becoming leader in 1940 and premier in 1947. While leader in 1942, Holway enlisted with the RAAF and served in Papua. Leading a major political party in one's 30s isn't something that happens by chance. Though his fortunes sometimes shifted, his keen political instinct was always there. As Premier, Holway ran his office out of the Windsor Hotel across the street from the Parliament and kept a kitchen cabinet which included Jack Williams, proprietor of the Herald and Weekly Times group of newspapers, as well as his wife Sheila and businessman Gordon Snow. Strangio illustrates this dynamic in the Victorian Premier's 1856 to 2006. Sheila sat in on all his Windsor Hotel meetings, to the intense annoyance of senior officials, and always sat in the parliamentary gallery when Tom was in the Assembly. Gordon Snow's influence over Holway was resented by Melbourne's business elite. When the Premier awarded Snow the knighthood he desperately craved, the extraordinary citation read Chief Confidential Advisor to Premier, State of Victoria. It was in his hotel suite that he received his ministerial colleagues and civil servants, usually with a gin and tonic in hand, one of whom allegedly told him to go to his office and work or resign because you can't run the country from the Windsor Hotel. By the time he had lost the leadership, Holway had been in Parliament for 20 years. He had had his time in the sun. His sole aim was to effect the redistribution of the Legislative Assembly to the detriment of the Country Party that had terminated his premiership. While his standing had fallen in the party since his loss of the leadership, there were still a few Liberals who backed Holway and his more ambitious redistribution plan. In the best traditions of the Victorian Parliament, Holway met with the Labor executive in secret and without authorisation from the caucus. On the 16th of September, Holway, on behalf of 7 other aligned MPs, signed an agreement with Labor that set out an extraordinary plan of parliamentary intrigue. Holway would move in the Legislative Assembly that the government lacked the confidence of the House, which would cause a vote to be held on the future of the MacDonald government. If they were successful, the Holway group would have the support of Labor in forming a government, which would have the singular purpose of passing redistribution laws before immediately calling an election. Holway agreed not to use the executive powers of the government in relation to industrial matters without consulting with Labor, and Labor agreed not to run candidates against the Holway group at the next election. The next day, Holway moved the no confidence motion. A country member inquired of Holway, "Do you think there will be a Labor Party candidate in opposition to you at the next election?" Holway replied, "I have not a clue regarding that matter." A packed public gallery looked on as the Country and Liberal parties stood against Labor and the Holway group in a debate that lasted 8 hours before culminating in a division that saw the government hang on by a single vote, despite Holway having brought on side an independent and 2 country members. A week after the vote, the Liberals kicked Holway out of the party room. He was followed out by members of his group. While the first attempt at seeing off the MacDonald government had failed, Holway was nowhere near finished. Before Holway could mount another offensive, however, Liberal leader Les Norman presented documents to the Parliament that purported to reveal a conspiracy, separate from the Labor agreement, that Holway had masterminded. Norman presented 6 affidavits from Liberal members who swore that attempts to bribe them to vote for the no-confidence motion were made by agents of Holway. They alleged that offers were made of portfolios in a new administration, immunity from Labor opposition in their seats, Labor preferences if the Liberals were to run a candidate against them, international flights, up to £10,000 in cash, and even the Premiership of Victoria. Conversely, those who refused were threatened with electoral retribution. One MP was told, "If you don't do what they want, they will oppose you in your seat and will spare neither money nor determination to beat you." Among those accused of having been involved were Alexander Dennett, a Holway Group MP, Sir Gordon Snow, a Mr Hodgkinson, Secretary of the Liquor Trades Council, William Dawnay Mould, a Holway Group MP, a Mr Raymond Ellenson, a business figure, Holway himself, and multiple figures that the MPs chose not to name in their affidavits or that did not disclose their names to the MPs. Norman suggested that a royal commission should be appointed to inquire into the allegations, while Labor suggested a select committee of the Parliament would be the most appropriate option. Following consultation between the government and the Solicitor General, though the Solicitor General had not advised any course of action above another, the Premier advised Parliament that the Cabinet had elected to appoint a royal commission, as, according to MacDonald, it is essential that the public mind must be satisfied by a competent and searching inquiry by the best available means. A highly political royal commission was, inadvisably, conducted by a highly political judge, Sir Edmund Herring, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Victoria. Herring had stood as an unendorsed UAP candidate in 1935 for Brighton, and had spearheaded the Conservative AstroTurf campaign known as the Call to the Nation in 1951. At a preliminary hearing before the Royal Commission began, Robert Whatley, one of the 6 MPs who made affidavits, related a phone conversation between himself and Holway. After Holway made his offer, Whatley testified that, "I said, the trouble with you, Tom, is that you have taken your defeat badly." He said, "It is obviously no use talking to you." Then Mr. Holway rang off. Meanwhile, intrigue continued in the Parliament. While the government could resist defeat in the lower house, the Legislative Council had 15 Labor members, with an additional 2 Holway MPs, giving the non-government forces a majority in that chamber. While they could not effect a loss of confidence in the Assembly, they could block supply of funds for the running of the government in the Council, which would, by convention, compel the resignation of the government in favour of one that could pass supply. On the 13th of October, Labor's executive endorsed blocking supply and implementing Holway's redistribution plan as part of their election platform. In doing so, Labor settled a score from 1947, where Liberal members had blocked supply in the Legislative Council, causing the collapse of the Cain Labor government. Strangio writes that the resort to such a manoeuvre had caused disquiet in the Central Executive, with some members regarding it as unconscionable. It required outrageous gall by Labor upper house members to cite the precedent of denial of supply to the Cain government in 1947, an action the party had branded as constitutional vandalism, to justify their assault against the MacDonald ministry in the Legislative Council. On October 21st, a bill supplying the government for 2 months was passed by the Legislative Assembly by the same one-vote margin, with the government MP recalled from the regional town of Kahuna, and a progressive Labor MP hobbling into the House with an injured foot to maximise their side's votes. Tensions flared in the debate. Keith Dodgson, a country member and Chief Secretary, interjected during a point of order from William Barry, a Labor MP. "You do not like being scraped off the opposition bench." Barry retorted that the Chief Secretary is very good at tackling little girls and telling lies about them in this Parliament, a reference to an issue from the previous month where 2 girls aged 13 and 15 were being kept in remand alongside convicted adult female prisoners in Pentridge Prison. The debate in the Legislative Council was similarly charged until the vote was finally taken at 2:30 a.m, with the supply bill being rejected by a margin of 1. Premier MacDonald advised the Assembly later that day that he would be seeking a dissolution from the Governor. That request being denied, MacDonald's government resigned, and Holway, with a caucus of 8, was commissioned to form a government. On the 28th of October, the day Holway was sworn in, the Royal Commission began in earnest. It did not make it through a day of proceedings before controversy struck. Holway had begun proceedings against the Age for libel based on their coverage of the bribery accusations. At the Royal Commission, the counsel for Les Norman pointed out that, with those proceedings ongoing, the Commission may find itself in contempt of court if it were to go on inquiring. After conferring, Sir Edmund Herring advised that the Royal Commission would be adjourning indefinitely while the libel case went on. Though Holway's counsel claimed they had wished for the Commission to continue, Holway was a solicitor. Had he wanted the Commission to go on, he could have chosen to not proceed with the libel case, as Sir Gordon Snow, who had withdrawn a similar case, had done. In the Assembly, the pausing of the investigation was received poorly. Cain, who had advocated for a parliamentary inquiry all along, quoted from the proceedings of the Royal Commission, where the question was asked of the Clerk of the Legislative Assembly: "Could you give Council any reference book whereby one could investigate the problem of a parliamentary commission inquiring into the conduct of members of Parliament?" The Clerk answered, "I would suggest the Imperial Acts Application Act 1922, which applies the Bill of Rights to Victoria. The Bill of Rights, I think it is Article 9, states that no court or other person shall inquire into the proceedings of Parliament." Cain's view was that the appointment of the Royal Commission was not justified, and the matter should have been dealt with in the proper place, which is in this House. If that procedure had been adopted, we would not have had all the difficulties that have arisen. On the opposition benches, the country and Liberal parties remained incensed at Holway's rise. In the Legislative Council, during the passage of a bill relating to Girl Guides, Country MP Trevor Harvey remarked bitterly, "I should like to ask the Minister of Public Works whether this organisation of Girl Guides educates girls in loyalty to their leaders and to their teammates." In the Assembly, there were frequent interjections as Kane teased the Liberals, who formed part of the opposition under MacDonald, that, during the next election campaign, the stalwarts of the metropolitan area will be speaking of our leader, the Honourable Member for Shepparton. Coming into government as the result of a blockage of supply, rather than a vote of no confidence, meant that the plan that Labor and Holway had agreed upon to legislate a redistribution would not be possible, as they had no control of the Assembly. It also meant that the government existed despite there being no evidence of their ability to command the confidence of the House. On the 29th of October, MacDonald moved a no-confidence motion, which succeeded. As it stood, one party had the confidence of the House but was unable to pass supply, while another party could pass supply but lacked confidence. The Governor, Dallas Brooks, sought advice on this unusual constitutional situation from the Victorian Chief Justice Sir Edmund Herring, but also took advice from Sir Owen Dixon, Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia, as Herring was, Brooks believed, up to his neck in Liberal politics. Ultimately, Brooks chose to commission MacDonald to form the government, who then advised the Governor to dissolve the Assembly on the 31st of October. The term of the Holway government remains the shortest in Victorian history, at just 3 days. At the 1952 Victorian state election, for the first time, Labor won a majority in the lower house. The biggest winner of the election, however, was undoubtedly Holway. His opponents in the Country Party would never govern Victoria again. They would not even form part of the government for another 40 years. The Liberals that had repudiated him had suffered a loss of 16 seats. Holway's party, the Electoral Reform League, played a decisive role in the Liberals' defeat. Though Holway denied making threats of electoral reprisal to those who had rejected his inducements, it seems he kept his word, helping to see off 4 of the 6 MPs who had made affidavits against him. Holway dealt with Les Norman personally. Norman, who had taken the leadership of the Liberals from him and exposed the bribery scandal, was a relatively new member for the southeastern Melbourne seat of Glen Iris. Holway, in a display of crazy brave political vengeance, abandoned Ballarat, his seat of 20 years, and travelled more than 100 kilometres to take the fight to Norman. Norman received a swing of 26.6 percentage points against him, and Holway won the seat without preferences. Finally, Holway's project, fixing the lower house malapportionment, was made law by Labor in early 1953. The 2-for-1 system, as it was known, based the electorates on the federal divisions, where 2 state electorates would be drawn in the boundaries of each federal electorate. In the new Parliament, there still remained the issue of the frozen Royal Commission. As Holway's libel proceedings were still on foot, no progress could be made. In February 1953, Holway began another libel action against the Sun for their coverage of the bribery saga. All of the libel actions were settled out of court by mid-1953. In March, the Kane government moved to limit the expenditure of the Royal Commission to £10, effectively ending it. This motion was not spoken to by any MPs, and it passed without a vote. A day later, Keith Dodgson, now Deputy Leader of the Country Party, asked the Premier whether a select committee would now be appointed to inquire into the issue. Kane answered by noting that there was no interest in his motion closing down the Royal Commission yesterday, and that if anyone is interested today or in the future, he has his right as a member of the House and can take whatever action he wishes. Outside of Parliament, he clarified that as far as we are concerned, the Royal Commission is finished. Later that month, one of Holway's MPs, Alexander Dennett, used the redistribution bill as a platform to discuss the need for a thorough inquiry into the allegations of bribery. During his speech, country member Sir Albert Lind interjected, "You have been bluffing ever since you came here." Dennett's response speaks to the divisive and personal effect the saga had on relationships in the Parliament. "I take the strongest personal objection to such an interjection, which impugns my personal honour, particularly when the interjection is made by an infamous fellow about whom I could tell some startling stories. I helped the honourable member for Gippsland East to get into Parliament. What a fool I was. I take the strongest objection to the honourable member suggesting that I am bluffing. After 30 years of personal friendship, I did not think he would be capable of making such an accusation." Dennett would continue to call for an investigation into 1954. His calls were met with interjections from Labor backbenchers. "The matter is as dead as Julius Caesar." At the budget of that year, Holway provided a retrospective on what he referred to as that despicable and amateurish conspiracy which so darkened the days towards the end of the 1952 session of Parliament, which, he said, was designed to defame him and his colleagues. He points to the strange origins of the allegations, 6 affidavits which all came directly to their party leader, Norman, and were only raised a fortnight after the fact. He queries why none of the MPs that were supposedly offered bribes raised a matter of privilege in Parliament. One such MP, Robert Whatley, who was present at the debate, was less interested in getting to the bottom of the matter through an inquiry, and said he had made it a rule in life that if there was any irregularity in Parliament, the less said about it the better. While the points raised and Whatley's attitude are concerning, it is important to consider the limited benefits for Norman and the Liberals in making false affidavits. While Holway was certainly an annoyance to the Liberals, convincing 6 MPs to perjure themselves just to get back at him is a very high-risk strategy, and there is no benefit for the MPs in doing this. Conversely, Holway had lost the premiership, he had lost the party leadership, and he was nearing the end of his parliamentary career. With nothing to lose and so much to gain in exacting vengeance, as well as his conveniently timed libel suit, Holway's version of events is hard to believe. In her thesis on Holway, historian Kate White concludes that it was likely that he had bribed MPs. Having achieved their goal of electoral reform, Holway's band of rebels, despite rebadging themselves as the Victorian Liberal Party, were swept out of both houses of Parliament at the elections of 1955. As time went on, fewer and fewer people were left to remember what happened in September 1952. The half-day hearing of the Royal Commission was the sum total of the investigation into the allegations of bribery that occurred. Holway was never investigated. Some believe that the matter was successfully buried by Holway. Journalist Evan Whitten presents the close connection between Holway and Jack Williams as evidence of a deliberate cover-up. A report in Jack Williams' Herald contrived to put the blame for aborting the Royal Commission on Holway's Liberal opponents, rather than on Holway, Gorman, Holway's counsel, Herring, and the 2 other judges. The only somewhat official account of events was produced by the Clerk of the Legislative Assembly for the Journal of the Society of Clerks at the Table in Commonwealth Parliaments, in a strictly factual retelling that relied on Hansard and Royal Commission transcripts. Published in late 1953, the article concludes with John Cain's open invitation to MPs to move for an inquiry. Despite the Holway Group's protestations, his call went unanswered, and history is much the poorer for it.